Hello and welcome to Lightways at Live Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, who is Morgan Le Gall. And I came across Morgan because he was giving a talk at my favorite place, the Astrological Lodge of London. And it really caught my imagination because it was called Physical Appearance and the Birth Chart. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. How are you today?
Very, very well. And it's one of those things that you read in books, that the ascendant is to do with physical appearance.
Hmm.
And if you delve into William Lilly's wonderful books, you will see him describe the individuals in great detail. And that's not even the birth chart he's looking at. He's looking at horary charts and
Hmm.
the ascendant and how it describes the querent and the appearance. So I thought it would be great fun to hear your take on this because is it true?
Well, according to experience, well, at least according to my experience, yes, it is. I did doubt it for some time, just because you never really know. Like physical description has been developed, not specifically, but a lot of it that I've been reading was from the Western world, kind of. And so sometimes you also have, according to the ages, different biases with the physical description. So you really have to read through these with a critical eye and an open mind as well. And then I was thinking, just like with everything with astrology, there's no better way to just try it than just do it for yourself, for clients and other people. And yeah, I was trying to think Horary works wonderfully well. Not always, though, because there is a need for the Horary to show, signs of physical description. If someone is asking you, for example, about, I don't know, a lost item, there might not be such a good reason for you to be able to describe the current asking you the question. But if it's someone who's gone missing, then there is a need. And so the chart is likely to show that to you. So that's when those rules actually come in very handy. Then for the natal chart, I have to admit, it is not as useful, perhaps. But to be honest with you, it does work. And whenever you come to realize that a chart might be a bit wrong or a bit off with the timing, it is very important to be able to align some of the ascending degrees with physical descriptions. And if you do dive a bit deeper, you come up with one specific planet that kind of rules them all. And it also offers you other insights on maybe personality, maybe career, other things like that. So that was a long-winded answer to say, yes, I do believe it works.
No, it's not a long-winded answer at all. I think, it is a very full answer. So, okay. So, do in your experience, when you're looking at physical appearance, are you looking at the ascendant?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually the first point that I'm looking at. I'm coming from a more traditional background, and even in the tradition, actually, some people just look at the sun sign and also the moon, or I should say the season, actually, more so than the sun sign. I think it might add a bit of details, but there's also a big tendency, and I, speaking for myself mainly, but I do believe that other people might be victim of that too, to feel a bit overwhelmed with the chart and just to be distracted by different points. So if I can just focus my attention on the ascendant first and foremost, then it really helps me just direct my attention to what really matters to flesh out the physical description.
It stands to reason that we would start with the ascendant because the ascendant is the body, so it stands to reason that that would be the case. So, how do you begin? Because you talked about the season. Do you begin with the season? Do you begin with, do you then, once you have the season, are you thinking about the element and perhaps the temperament? Let's hear the process.
Yeah, no, let's break it down. So I don't exactly use the seasons. I'm more into the ascendant. So I look at the sign that is ascending and I'm thinking, okay, what type of energy is it? Is it more active? Is it more receptive? And then I think in shapes. Like I love drawing. And so I don't know if you're familiar with painting or drawing or any type of art, but usually you have to have like a basic structure in which you then just chisel things away to give it form. And so for me, it's just like that. I think of the type of energy. Is it more active, receptive? Then what type of element is it? If it's air, for example, I'm going to think of a taller figure. But if it's an element like earth or water, I'm going to think, oh, it's closer to the ground. So maybe someone who's just average or a bit shorter. And then I'm going to be looking at the planet ruling the ascendant as well. Someone who's Jupiterian by nature will be a bit wider than life, but someone who's Mercurial will be very dry and very thin and slender. So that's usually those three things that I look into the ascendant first.
Okay, so we've got the element. That's important. Are you then looking at modality?
Yes, I do look if it's cardinal, fixed, or double-bodied. People have different ways of saying those. I never remember which one I should be using, so I'm going to give those three. But yes, the type of modality also gives you something else. I actually came across some of Robert Zoller's material, and he was giving physical shapes to those modalities, and that really opened up my mind and actually blew my mind as well. And I think Dr. H from Regulus Astrology also has some papers online that is freely accessible, and he was doing some research with those. So a square, a circle, or a triangular shape, for depending on the modality. And I don't always agree, but I do feel like there is something to it, and it really helps you just put the basic shapes together. So, for example, um, any double-bodied side would be more of an elongated rectangle. So actually, that would be a rectangle. But so yeah, a longer, thinner shape, whereas a fixed sign, because it has a tendency to just gather things, I think we say centripetal, perhaps, like attracting things to you, would accumulate, and so that gives you a rounder shape.
Okay, that's interesting. So we're looking at shapes to do with the modalities as well. Do we think about, facial features? Have you because William Lilly really goes into great detail about it's almost like he's doing some sort of what do they call it? Remote seeing, remote view.
Remote viewing, yes,
he,
absolutely.
he talks about, oh, there will be a birthmark on the right thigh, or something kidney shaped on the right thigh, and you think, really? and and it proved to be so. He then says, So, have you played around with this?
Yes, I have. So it it gets a bit tricky depending on the type of astrology you're doing. If you're doing natal astrology, we have to remember that that one chart will kind of rule or signify the native over his lifetime or her lifetime. So I remember actually looking at my own chart, and one of the rules is look at the Lord of the first house in what sign it is, and then you will have a mark. And so for me, I have Jupiter in Pisces. And I was thinking, this is weird because I don't remember having like any beauty marks, moles, or anything that would resemble something of Jupiter in Pisces. And then I can't remember if it was brought up by perfection or a transit, but it so happened that I had a mole grow on my ankle. Um, and I do believe that feminine signs are supposed to be on the left side. And it so happened that the mole grew on my left ankle. And whenever it's below the horizon, it's supposed to be kind of hidden on as easy to see. And it's on the inside and not the outside of the ankle. And I had to get it removed, long story short. And then I looked back at the chart and I was like, oh my God. So yeah, it does happen. Like eventually you might get those marks. And I looked in charts of family members and friends, and it does happen. Now, when it comes to really like physical features, or are you going to have like a thin nose, a wider nose, or you also have like very big descriptions on the color of the eyes or the shape of the eyes. This is a bit trickier in natal charts, just because I do not believe, or at least I do not have the skills, perhaps, to draw a physical portrait with 100% accuracy. Like I will miss some details. I might get one or two details wrong as well. It's just, the nature of things, I guess. No one's perfect. But then when it comes to Horary astrology, because this is a very context and moment-oriented chart, you will have stronger signs of how the eyes might be, or if there's a scar on the face, or a pockmark face, or someone who might be, on the wider side of the scale, or someone very thin. So I do believe that Horary astrology can be a bit more precise when it comes to physical description. But granted, once again, because the Horary chart is for one moment in time, against, the natal chart, which is supposed to go from birth to death. So it could be quite a long time sometimes. And there's another important thing that William Lilly talks about, and Bonatti as well. They say basically you need to wait. They don't say it like that, but it's the first Saturn return. Basically, if you survive this, then the physical description is kind of not set in stone, but easier to identify. And I had the occasion to work on a chart, and it was a young lady actually, and I looked at the height, which I don't really do anymore because it's not that easy. But I looked at the height and was like, "Oh, you're supposed to be that tall," and I don't know what. I think she was a daughter of a friend, and she might have been 15 or 16. And then she went through some type of surgery or something, and she gained a few inches, and so it did get to what I had roughly, estimated. And I was like, oh, so you do have to wait a bit longer because you never know what could happen.
Wow, that's brilliant. There's just so many thoughts. I'm just trying to tease out some of them in an orderly fashion. But it's because I've read this and I've never really devoted the time to actually study it like you have. I've noticed some things, yes, but it's very interesting because, and one of the reasons that I'm asking the questions I'm asking is because my curiosity. The question is, this was written, in a time when we didn't have large migration, across the
Mhm.
world, and so it's, as you said, it's very specific to European features, if we can put it like that.
Mhm.
But when we start thinking about shape and we start thinking about other aspects, then it becomes much broader, and now it becomes much more of a universal thing. And looking at marks on the body, etc., it becomes much more interesting. So that was the first thing that occurred to me. And the second thing, listening to you, was the thing about horary, as you say, it's that moment in time, but it's also the moment in which you meet the person. You, as astrologer, meet the person in that moment. And so, who are you meeting? And the chart describes that beautifully. There are times when you can't get away from this reality. And I had a perfect example of this week. Um, I was holding a meeting for a group of people who came together to discuss certain issues around food production. And I had noticed at the start of the day, I'm sure that everyone who's been paying attention to what's going on in the heavens can't have failed to notice the T-square right now between the Sun, Mars, and Pluto. And on the day, the Sun and Pluto were exactly square. So it was a perfect square. And Mars, I think, was about 1 degree out. So this was a very tight T-square. And I looked at that and I didn't really register it because I wasn't looking at it in the context of that meeting. I was looking at it because I was doing a consultation chart for a therapy client, and I was, looking at it from her perspective.
Mm.
How is she experiencing life at this moment? What's the nature of the therapy session that we're going to be doing today? So that's what I was doing, and
Mm.
forgot all about it till that evening. And I looked at everyone who was joining the call, and there was one man. I thought, uh-oh. I could feel the brooding anger that was simmering in this man. And he did inadvertently attempt to hijack the meeting with his, I say inadvertently because I don't think he had that intention, but his anger was such that it was dominating, and I had to be very careful to assert myself very gently for the benefit of everybody else who was getting very irritated, because he was one of these people who was not listening at all,
Mhm.
at all. Now, I wasn't looking at the ascendant, but after the meeting, I thought, oh, there's that angry young man. He was Mars personified. He was the right age. You know, he could have been, if you looked at him, he looked like the archetypal soldier, the short hair, you know, a bit of a muscular build, and boy oh boy was he angry. And also with Pluto there really making it quite explosive, I thought, yes, I wish I'd remembered that going into the meeting, because he did remind me. So that, so I guess what I'm getting at is I can see why the horary would be so pertinent, because it is that moment when you meet the person. And
Mhm.
this was happening, and it wasn't even the ascendant I was looking at, but the ascendant had I, and I am going to go back to check that ascendant now, because I'd like to see, because for one thing, I've been wanting to know who was the Lord of the Hour.
Oh, yeah.
Who was the Lord of the Hour? I'd like to see that as well. And I shall probably message you to let you know later.
Please do, because now I'm kind of curious and I feel involved. So-
My own curiosity now, speaking with you. So that's brilliant. The other thing you said was basically we grow into that ascendant because, and of course, because our bodies are always changing, aren't they?
Mm,
So I've got a question then.
mhm.
Would a natal chart through progressions show the way the body might evolve through the ascendant?
Very good question. I do not use progressions. You mean like secondary progressions, I imagine? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't used those in some time, but I've been meaning to start some research on distributions through the terms or the bounds, depending how you call them, because I do believe that looking at the movement of the ascendant through the different terms would actually indicate things maybe helping or afflicting the body, especially when it comes to the aspect of some other planet in your natal chart. Um, and I'm thinking, for example, of a person I know. She's always been very thin up until the age of 26, 7 years old. And then she went through pregnancies and other things, and she had to have the medical help to get pregnant, and she's gained a lot of weight and she's never lost that weight. And so in the natal chart, actually, I wanted to go back to that chart and just look at the distributions of the ascendant and see if that would hit a specific point to indicate a change of body weight, for example. But we could apply that to also, unfortunately, amputations, for example, someone with diabetes, or maybe someone in the military. That would be interesting to actually look at those charts and see when that unfortunate event happened and see if it hits any points. So in theory, I do think that any type of progressions or distributions should be able to pinpoint towards any changes in the body, but I don't have the research to back that up yet.
Well, I can't wait until you do, because then, I'm also thinking about directions and wondering whether directions to the ascendant might also reveal something, which brings me to the sixth house, because if we're talking about the way that the body might change, and you gave the fabulous story about the mole, um, that appeared on your foot, and it automatically now makes me think about medical astrology and whether there's any link between that and the sixth house.
There is, to some extent, and actually, when you dive into the medical astrology, side of things, I just do it for myself, just because I'm not a professional, doctor or medical anything. So I just do it on myself to see if something works. But even looking at the ascending sign does show a potential weakness for you physically. So that's going to go a bit personal, but my mother, for example, has Scorpio rising, and she's had a ton of issues with her sexual organs and cysts and things like that. Thankfully, everything, got resolved, but that was interesting to note. For me, I've got Sagittarius rising, and I do have one of my hips that is just ever so slightly rotated. And it's just two examples of many other examples I could give you. So just looking at the ascendant sometimes give you a sense of something that maybe could go wrong. I'm thinking of my partner. Thankfully, he doesn't have any heart issues, but for whatever reason, he's got anxieties about his heart, and he's got Leo rising, and I just find it funny to realize those connections. But then looking at my chart as well, I've got Taurus on the sixth house. Thankfully, so far, I don't have any issues with my thyroid or anything, but ever since I was a kid, and I just got sick actually very recently when I was traveling. And the first thing that gets hit for me when I get sick is my throat. I get a sore throat and I just absolutely loathe it, but it happens all the time. So there is something to say about that sixth house as well.
Yeah, I would guess that would be the case. So we've been talking purely about the sign ascending, but for many people, the sign ascending, and of course, then we're looking at perhaps the chart ruler automatically, and you mentioned that. But for many people, there are planets in the first house. So are we looking specifically at planets conjunct the ascendant, or do planets in the first house generally have a bearing as well?
So for me, I imagine they could have a bearing, but to be honest with you, I keep it very, very tight and very simple. So after looking at the ascendant and the Lord of the Ascendant, I focus, is there any planet within 3 degrees, usually, of the ascendant? And I'm not even necessarily, like, I would be looking at sextiles, trines, squares, and oppositions, but I set my eye specifically on a conjunction and then potentially an opposition because it's very, in your face type of thing. But because you mentioned the first house, yes, any planet in the first house conjunct the ascendant within 3 degrees for me will tend to say a lot. And if it doesn't override the Lord of the Ascendant or the sign it is in, it adds a lot to it, almost 50% of the physical description, I think.
Well, that's very interesting. Um, so you're looking at it within a very tight orb. Um, and your feeling is that wider orbs are not so relevant in terms of the physical appearance.
Right. And I'm not even talking like modern types of orbs, because I think a lot of modern astrologers, or at least when I was studying modern astrology, they applied orbs to aspects. But coming from a traditional side now, I'm applying orbs to the planets. But I'm not even talking to other things. I'm just looking, okay, if it's 3 degrees between the ascending degree and that planet, or I would go up to 5 degrees, to be honest with you. But beyond that, it kind of washes it down and it's probably not as prevalent.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Well, that's very interesting. Have you found anything indicating birthmarks that run in the family?
You mean like from a mom to a
Yeah.
son or daughter? I haven't had the occasion to actually look at that. I do have birthmarks. Oh, another thing actually that now that I'm thinking about it, you were mentioning, the sixth house earlier, and one of looking for the different marks that someone can have, specifically in the Horary, but also in the natal chart. I was telling you that Taurus was descending on the sixth cusp for me, and so my throat was usually touched. But Lily says you also find a mark usually, and I do have a birthmark actually behind my neck. I just got reminded of that. So it can be pretty uncanny. But no, I haven't had really the chance to see that in action if someone a generation of people, having the same mole, for example, because it could happen sometimes. I do know actually a mom and a son that could probably have their birth chart. Maybe I should actually reach out because Yeah, now you're giving me a new idea because I usually look at physical description and if someone takes on more from the mom or the dad physically, but I've never had the chance to look at specific marks.
Well, that's interesting in itself, what you've just said, that you can look at the chart and see who the individual might resemble more, mom or dad. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's something that I just not discovered because I did not discover it, but realized when I was reading Lily, because I thought I knew the material quite well, and then I read his example on natal on his nativity in book three, and he said something towards the end saying, I can't remember how that went, but something like, oh, the planet most likely signifying him is either ruling the fourth house or in the fourth house, which to Lily says, oh, he takes on from his dad. And I was like, huh, that is interesting because even in the tradition, there is a bit of a debate sometimes. You know, people might think that family as a whole, mom and dad, could be the fourth house. There is only especially in the Renaissance, I think, where they said, oh, actually, the 10th house being opposite to the fourth might, you know, maybe the dad is the fourth and the mom might be the opposite house. Other people nowadays even think sometimes the main parent might be the fourth house and the other one might be the 10th house. So I don't know, whatever, you know, works for everyone. For me, usually I just follow the dad being the fourth house and I allow the 10th to be the mom. And yeah, doesn't always say in a chart because sometimes the planet that I isolate as the main one does not necessarily rule aspect or is located in either the fourth or the 10th house. But I did start to look at this and I did realize that actually when there is a connection to either the fourth or the 10th house, sometimes both, you can put the images side by side and you do realize that there is a lot to take from either from you know a dad or a mom or both sometimes at the same time. Like I'm thinking of my mom, for example, because it was just easy access for me. And there is something to say. I think I can't remember what the chart said, but there was a bit of resemblance to both of them, but maybe more so from the mom. And I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And even my granddad, I was looking at my great grandparents, and I could identify this with his dad, for example. And I was like, oh, this is good. So I've even experimented with the lots as well, lot of the father and mother, just to see if that one planet that I identify for physical description might be ruling in aspect or very close to the lot, you know, of one of the parents. And so usually it's kind of a judgment call where just like, I think there is more towards the mom or the dad. And then you look at the pictures and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
I need to find time to play around with this.
You
Um,
should, yeah.
but so I can see we could have a lot of fun with this. But I'm just thinking about what you said there about the ruling planet being neither the 10th or the 4th. So my ruling planet is in the 10th house. And I think you'd be hard pushed to find someone who didn't say I look like my mom.
And so maybe I should also clarify, there is a way that I come at a specific planet for physical description. So for example, I'm trying to think of a chart, but let's say so you have Libra rising and you've got Venus somewhere in your chart, and you also happen to have a very close planet aspecting Venus. If for whatever reason that planet is also in a sign ruled by Venus, there is so much Venus coming through that I'm going to identify, okay, Venus is probably the one planet that offers the most description. It's not to say that, you know, other planets don't add any details, they do. But then I'm going to be looking at that Venus and say, okay, is it ruling the fourth house? Is it in it? Is it ruling the 10th? Or is it in connection to one of the lots? And then depending on how that Venus is interacting with those specific points, that's how I judge, oh, that person takes on from the dad or the mom.
Hmm. We've been talking a lot about physical description, obviously, but I'm wondering whether anything could be said about the way an individual moves, the type of movement that they they do.
Yeah, you actually find those descriptions in the traditional texts. Someone you who might be Jupiterian will exude some confidence, and so they will have usually a very smiley and a very open walk. Especially someone who's got Sagittarius rising, they will tend to almost jump when they walk. But then if you have someone who's got a strong Saturn, depending on how that Saturn is doing in the chart, you might find them looking a bit more down towards the, being a bit more centered, like it's a cold and dry planet, and it just brings everything together and combines things. So that person is not going to be very much open to the world, but is going to be a bit more focused on what is directly in front of them and especially, below them. Um, and they don't have that same confidence. And then if you've got the sun, for example, because it shines and everything, that person's going to be open to the world. And depending on how that sun is doing, the head will be held high and just, so it's, yeah, you do find those descriptions. I can't always identify that in charts because when I work with clients, sometimes I not really sure how they could describe their walk. It's almost worth asking someone else that they know. Because if you ask me, for example, I feel like I walk normally. And if you ask all of my friends, they make fun of me because it looks like I'm jumping, almost like I'm only using the ball of my foot, apparently, and not really pressing my heels. So I'm just hopping along. and,
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be aware of that. So,
it's interesting because unless we watch ourselves on video, we don't know how we walk. But I asked you the question because I can usually spot a Virgo ascendant, not just because of the way that they walk, but actually it's the way they move their arms, their hands in
mhm,
almost small, precise movements. And,
uh-huh.
very, very small, very precise movements. And you ask a Virgo ascendant how they, if whether, how many of them are going to be able to say, "Oh yes," but it's just something that I recognize is there. Um, so that's why I asked you specifically about movements. What about speech patterns?
Mm. So speech is almost a different thing because I mean sometimes the physicality of your mouth or tongue. Some people are tongue tied or some people have a speech impediment, but I don't think it. I would need to research that, but I don't think it's always something physical. And in the tradition, usually you find other signs of people having speech impediment, like any inflections between Saturn and Mercury, especially in water signs, which are mute signs, will give, some speech impediments. I don't know anyone who's had that. So
I
now
was
I'm gonna
more, I
add to
was
my
more,
list a ton of things.
yeah, no, I was more thinking in terms of, some people speak very quickly, very
Oh
rapidly,
yes. Hmm.
very much more slowly. Some don't seem to understand that they're shouting, but they to other people because they speak as a very loud in a very loud volume. Others are very quietly spoken. And I was just wondering whether you had noticed any of those patterns in relation to the ascendant.
Yes. Usually you will find people with either Aries or Scorpio. Anyone who is represented by Mars will have a tendency to speak a bit louder. And yeah, because I'm trying to think of the different charts I've seen, but yes, the sun sometimes, if it rules a person, they don't always speak loudly, but they do have that booming voice that they can use whenever they want something, attention, or like people in the theater, they almost learn to project their voice. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I've noticed that solo people can really project that voice. I was trying to think of for me, because people usually say that my voice is just like, even when I'm shouting, it's almost like I'm shouting from the back of my throat, like nothing really comes out. And I actually have Saturn very close to my ascendant. And I think that actually compresses or um, prevents me from being too loud, even when I want to be loud or when I should be loud.
Yeah. Oh, hard luck that.
I know.
For a
Well,
Sagittarius
thankfully,
ascendant.
yeah, thankfully, I don't do anything that really requires, me to shout or anything.
Yes, thankfully. Well, that's very interesting. One final question, and this is about the presentation of the person, how they present themselves. So through the choice of clothing, etc. Have
Mm.
you noticed the that a person's style or color preferences match the ascendants?
Hmm. I have very little data on this. I can say that depending on the type of planets, if you have Saturn, usually you'll be attracted towards darker colors. But I do believe that it also depends where, like, how your ascendant moves. Like we were talking about directions, progressions, distributions. Because if I think of myself, for example, so I've got Sagittarius rising, and Jupiter is like very green and blue, and so it's I wouldn't say very bright colors, but it could be something a bit more colorful than Saturn. And throughout my teenage years, everyone was very colorful around me, and I was not goth by any mean, but I was very much into the dark colors, like dark brown, dark green, because I wanted to almost erase my presence from everywhere. And then there was a point when I think that was when I was 20 or so, a bit older than that. Um, I was just super excited to have like any type of colors, even if that was very loud and in people's faces. I was like, I don't care. I just want to be colorful. And now I'm kind of tamed again. So I'm kind of wondering if there's not something about transits or directions, that could say something. But other than that, yes, if you have like a very strong Venus aspecting, the Lord of your ascendant or the ascendant or very prominent in your chart, you will be more tailored or more fashion oriented, perhaps, depending on the quality of that Venus as well. And then if you're Saturn, you will not go into bright yellows or bold colors, maybe something more earthy. But this is very much generalizing. You would need to look at the whole chart and see the not quality necessarily, but the essential dignities and afflictions to the planets to try and tailor um, how a person would dress. But I do think there is something to be said about this. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, you've given us a fabulous introduction, I guess, to this fun aspect of astrology. I think it is fun. Obviously, it could have its more serious uses, as you say, in horary, and but for anyone wanting to just experiment, this is a very fun thing to do. So, Morgan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
If people want to find you, how do they do that?
I don't have a website yet, just because I've been procrastinating for years and years. And also just because astrology is kind of my hobby, so I don't spend all the time I would want. So an email address, actually, they can reach out to me at morganlg.astro@gmail.com.
I'll put that into the description box. And I will also be putting a link to the Astrological Lodge of London in the description box, because there you might just be able to find the recording for this lovely talk and the recording of many talks. If you are not yet a member, do consider joining, because you will hear the most wonderful lectures and also have access to seminars, and so much goes on at the Astrological Lodge of London that really you shouldn't miss out. Thank you once again, Morgan.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. In the description, of course, the description box, of course, you will also find my own email address, as well as the link to